When Justice Ian Harrison convicted Chris Dawson for the 1982 murder of his first wife, Lynn, he did so on a circumstantial case.
The evidence does not reveal how Mr. Dawson killed Lynette Dawson. It does not reveal whether he did so with the assistance of anyone else or by himself. It does not reveal where or when he did so, nor does it reveal where Lynette Dawson's body is now. The charge of murder in this trial is unsupported by direct evidence. The case against Mr. Dawson is wholly circumstantial.
That means there was no body, no crime scene, no weapon or no eyewitness that could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Dawson committed the crime. When a prosecutor is running a circumstantial case, like Craig Everson was in 2022 when Chris Dawson was brought to trial, they have to instead rely on other types of evidence, like witness testimony, police statements, official documents, video footage, and contemporaneous notes or correspondence to prove it. This huge body of evidence is known in the law as strands of a cable, or links in a chain, or threads in a rope. Basically, it means each thread isn't necessarily capable of proving a case on its own, but they're more powerful, sometimes even undeniable, when they're all woven together. Chris Dawson's case was heard by a judge alone. That's what the former rugby league star wanted. He argued in the run-up to his Supreme Court trial that the publicity generated by the Australians' investigative podcast, The Teacher's Pet, meant he wouldn't get a fair trial if the decision were in the hands of a jury. But the thinking is that judges aren't as easily swayed as regular Joes like you and I. And so, in hearing the case alone, Justice Harrison had to determine the truth of those threads himself. On Tuesday, Belinda Rigg SC, the public defender representing Chris Dawson in his appeal, argued that Justice Harrison got it wrong when he accepted that Lynn died on that weekend in early January 1982. Remember, Chris Dawson has always maintained he received a phone call from Lynn on Saturday, January 9, while he was working as a lifeguard at the Northbridge Baths. He claims she said in that call she was going away for a few days to clear her head. Rigg had previously argued there was a reasonable possibility that's what happened because Lynn was confident her beloved daughters, then just 4 and 2 years old, would be well cared for by Dawson, who she said was every bit the doting dad. But Rigg argued that the fact of Lynn's death, the thread, wasn't borne out by the evidence presented at trial. There are no phone records to show that a long-distance phone call was received at the kiosk at the baths. The teenage attendant who answered the phone says she can't remember who was on the other end, or if it was the call Dawson says he took. Lynn's mum, Helena Sims, and his friend Philip Day, who were also at the baths on that day, didn't see or hear Dawson take the call. Over the course of more than 2 hours on Tuesday morning, Belinda Rigg covered a lot of ground. Some of it was reiterating arguments made on Monday. But there was some newness there too. Justice Ian Harrison found Chris Dawson was motivated to kill his first wife by an obsession with the teenage babysitter known as JC. The pair later married and had a child together. He found Dawson was terrified of losing the teenager, who'd also been his student, and saw his wife as a roadblock to that relationship. But on Tuesday, Belinda Rigg told the court Dawson would have carried on with JC, even if he was still married to Lynn, and that it was JC who wanted out. We've used voice actors to bring you the words spoken in court.
Lynette was never an impediment as far as JC was concerned, and he demonstrated himself to be well prepared to lose his relationship with his wife if JC would continue the relationship with him.
In the final moments of her submissions, Rigg swung big. She suggested the better elements of Dawson's character had been overlooked by Justice Harrison in 2022 and implored Justices Julie Ward, Christine Adamson and Anthony Payne not to do the same.
On the issue of the reasonableness of the verdict, the applicant's character is something which is required in our submission to be taken into account, and we've set out in detail in the written submissions the evidence that bears upon that issue of his good character.
Justice Adamson responded.
Just in terms of that good character, he didn't have any criminal convictions, but when one looks at the evidence of JC and how he conducted himself as a married man, as a teacher with students under his authority, one might think that the good character was not entitled to be given any particular weight.
Dawson claims he dropped Lynn, who didn't drive, at a bus stop in Mona Vale on Sydney's northern beaches on the morning of Saturday, January 9. It was later that day that he says she called him at the baths to say she needed some time away. JC testified at trial that Dawson allowed her to wear and keep items of Lynn's clothing after he moved her into the family home at Bayview. Her wedding and engagement rings were also left there and later made into a new wedding set for JC. That wasn't lost on Justice Julie Ward, who said it was convenient that Lynn wasn't wearing the rings when Dawson alleges he took her to the bus stop. Belinda Rigg had one more hand to play on Tuesday before clearing the floor for Crown Prosecutor Brett Hatfield to make his submissions. She attempted to tender more than 700 pages of material relating to Chris Dawson's declining mental health. Hatfield objected to the tender. He said he was concerned it would be used in some kind of opaque attack on the prosecution case run by Craig Everson in 2022.
If it's going to be suggested that something improper occurred, or there was bad faith by the trial Crown in how he conducted the matter, then that should be made clear and we should be able to respond with proper submissions directed at it.
Rigg responded that the material, which included medical assessments made by a doctor and a psychologist following Dawson's incarceration, was important in understanding his current circumstances and the ongoing impact of the long delay in bringing charges. But Justice Julie Ward said a large chunk of time had already been dedicated to Dawson's so-called forensic disadvantage and rejected the tender. Coming up, what the Crown Prosecutor has to say about Chris Dawson's version of events. Subscribers to The Australian get access to this kind of in-depth reporting and analysis 24/7, even when it happens on the same day as the federal budget. There's also breaking news alerts, newsletters and live events. Check us out at theaustralian.com.au. We'll be back after this break. When he opened his submissions on Tuesday, Crown Prosecutor Brett Hatfield got right to the point. We've used voice actors to bring you the words spoken in court.
There is not a significant possibility that an innocent person has been convicted in this case.
Hatfield argued that Dawson's version of events, that Lynn had left the family home at Bayview voluntarily and called him at the Northridge Baths to relay her plan to spend some time away, wasn't credible. The prosecutor worked his way, sometimes at breakneck speed, through the evidence given by Lynn's family members, her friends, her colleagues, and even JC, the teenage babysitter who was installed at Bayview after she disappeared in early 1982. Hatfield said Lynn never contacted anyone but Chris Dawson after January 8 of that year. Dawson's public defender, Belinda Rigg, argued that the Sims family weren't particularly close or in any kind of habitual contact. But Hatfield said prolific diary entries and letters penned by Lynn's mum, Helena, proved the opposite.
That material does show a very close and regular contact between the deceased and her mother.
What's more, evidence given by Lynn's siblings, Pat Jenkins and Greg Sims, showed members of the family spoke regularly and often spent time together at their parents' home in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Hatfield said later that even if her marriage to Dawson ended, Lynn wouldn't cut contact with her parents and siblings. Next, Hatfield dealt with Rigg's assertion that it was plausible that Lynn would leave the family home, knowing her children would be in safe hands with their father. Hatfield pointed to Dawson's decision to send the two children to stay with their grandmother, Helena Sims, after their trip to the Northridge Baths on January 9, as evidence he possibly wasn't as well equipped as a parent as he'd have the court believe.
My learned friend's argument is that he was a fantastic father and could take care of the kids himself. Why, the deceased is disappearing off for a few days, is he specifically asking for the children to go to the mother's on that day if she is happy leaving the kids with him, and then wanting the kids to go to her mother's place but then not contacting her mother? It seems to be part of the implausibility.
The prosecutor acknowledged Lynn Sims was upset about the deterioration of her relationship and the arrival on the scene of the teenage babysitter, JC. But he said she was also committed to her marriage.
If she wasn't leaving when those other things occurred, why would she leave when it was looking better after the counselling?
By other things, Hatfield means Dawson's infidelity and his impromptu trip to Queensland with JC just before Christmas in 1981. The pair ultimately returned to Sydney when JC became ill. The prosecutor also pointed to various attempts by Dawson to leave Lynn, including taking out a lease on a property in Manly where he intended to live with JC. Hatfield said Dawson's interactions with JC were marked by a degree of desperation and obsession.
An affair is an understatement about this relationship. It's not an affair, it's an obsessive-possessive relationship with a between the applicant, the former teacher of the girl, that turns 18 only at that time.
Where Belinda Rigg attempted to build up Dawson's character in her submissions, the prosecutor, Brett Hatfield, took a different tack. He said Chris Dawson's behaviour in the days and weeks after Lynn disappeared wasn't what you'd expect from a concerned husband.
The applicant conducted himself in a manner which was completely irreconcilable with any purported belief that the deceased might be alive or return home. So, collecting JC from Southwest Rocks on the 11th of January 1982, immediately cohabitating with JC and sharing the matrimonial bed and the evidence about the clothing and the jewellery at that time.
Hatfield noted that based on the available evidence, Dawson was the last person to see Lynn alive, meaning he had both opportunity and motive to kill her on or about the 8th of January in 1982. The prosecutor said proof of life checks conducted in the months and years after that date had come up empty. All of that taken together, the prosecutor says, means Justice Ian Harrison's finding that Dawson murdered his wife was reasonable. He'll continue his submissions today. Come back to the front tomorrow to hear how it all wraps up. And you can read about what the government's new federal budget means for you at theaustralian.com.au.